Welcome to post-game video. Hey everybody, welcome in. I'm Derek. He's Greg.
Hello.
We're in my home office. We're not in Columbus, but we're going to talk about the football game that just ended probably 30 or so minutes ago. We were both listening to Scott Frost talk about the game and heard a couple players talk about the game. And we asked for some of your questions, some stuff that you wanted us to talk about. So we're just going to talk about the game. 52-17, an Ohio State win. Nebraska opens the 2020 campaign with a loss. It didn't. If you're just looking at the score, if you're just looking at the box score, it doesn't look much different than last year. But it did look different from last year, right?
Yes, they weren't. Nebraska was not completely overrun and overmatched out there against Ohio State. I didn't think this time. I felt like it looked like they belonged on the field. Last year's game, it just never felt good from the start from a Nebraska perspective that they were ever going to kind of hang in there. And in fact, even as they were kind of trading blows back and forth early in the game, you still felt like Nebraska was still kind of hanging around and at least had a shot through the first half, really. And then they had a couple of plays later in the game where you thought maybe they could get within shouting distance. It just didn't happen. Ohio State blew the game open. But I thought it looked a lot better overall and closer than the score would indicate.
Sure.
Which,
at least in the first half. This was a 14-14 game midway through the second quarter.
right.
And then Ohio State has an 11-play, 71-yard drive. I think those are the numbers. A long drive that goes down to the Nebraska 13-yard line, takes 5 minutes off the clock, and Nebraska stuffs Master Teague on 3rd and 1 and forces a field goal. And so you're looking at that and you're thinking there was 3 minutes before halftime. Nebraska's got a pair of timeouts in its pocket, and you're thinking, okay, a field goal is a win for the defense. And I mean, the offense really moved the ball well, and at times exceptionally well on the ground against Ohio State in the first half. And then they get that stop, and then everything just kind of falls apart, right? And I think is that maybe the most frustrating part of this game, is that it just, like, you saw progress being made, both on the offensive and the defensive line. From a physicality standpoint, guys talked afterwards about they felt like they were closer, they were more competitive, but at the same time, how different was it really? The middle portion of the game crushed them again.
Right.
They have self-inflicted wounds. I joked on Twitter that at one point they didn't shoot themselves in the foot. They took out a bazooka and launched it at their toe. Is that frustrating, or do you think they're going to leave this feeling optimistic still, even though it was 52-17 at the end?
I think that they're going to come out of this game feeling optimistic, because I think that there's two things. One, and I think Scott Frost said this and alluded to it, that the team really did shoot itself in the foot. Like, they did some nice things, but then they had a self-inflicted wound, which kind of stopped their momentum because they were not able to get the momentum. And then when you're playing a team as good as Ohio State is, one of the best teams in the country, like, stopping that momentum it's going to compound the issues, right? Because now you don't have the opportunity to regain that. Whereas if you were playing basically any other team in the conference, and especially those middle of the pack teams, you could make those mistakes and maybe get away with it because it's not going to hurt you as much. Against this team and the talent gap that's already there between Nebraska and Ohio State, there was just no way to overcome that.
Yeah, you talked about this during the game. Their margin for error is just so small right now.
Yeah, especially in very small against this particular team.
They're so good. This team is very good.
There was a point in this game, and I was joking with you about this. So after you had the big hit that took out Chris Olave, right? And he goes out after the Deontay Williams hit and ensuing fumble that JoJo Doman recovered. And I'm like, okay, their big-time receiver, their star receiver goes out. And before it even happens, I'm like, hey, man, the guy that's about to come in is probably really good too, and he got replaced by a different 5-star. Like that, and that happens all across the board.
Is that the kid that made the toe tap?
No, he was already
Or is that
in.
a different guy?
That's a different guy.
Oh, it's a different 5-star that they have?
There were 2 5-stars from that class, from that freshman class. Julian Fleming was one of them. Jackson Smith and Jibo was the guy that made that one toe tap grab in the back of the end zone. Was one of the best catches you're gonna see all day, right? Like it seemed like
I think early catch of the year.
Yeah, that was an amazing catch
good
from a true freshman in his first game.
Yeah. So like I said, we asked for some reaction. We asked for some questions or some thoughts that you guys wanted us to talk about. One thing that kept coming up a lot was the wide receiver component of this game for Nebraska. Lack of touches for Wando Robinson. He had 6 catches for 49 yards, but he was only targeted downfield once. I think once. He had 1 catch. It was a downfield catch, at least. And just a complete lack of a vertical threat from Nebraska through the air. It was all swing passes, screen passes, stuff over the middle of the tight ends. Where do you want to start with the wide receiver conversation? Do you want to start with, because somebody asked, is it the fact that Nebraska does not have a deep threat at wide receiver, or the fact that Nebraska has a quarterback that can't throw the deep ball? Omar Manning obviously didn't play this game, so we could start there, or we could start with Wando. What stood out to you most when talking about the wide receivers?
Man, I think it was the lack of even attempting it, which is something that we've talked about, you and I, from last season, where it just doesn't, not only are they conservative kind of in the offensive passing game play calling, they're not even attempting to do it, just to see what happens, right? And maybe you throw it down there and the guy just knocks it down or whatever, but you don't even see it from Nebraska. And I do think that on one hand, I think there's 2 ways to look at this. On one hand, you could say, okay, that's not sustainable. You're not going to be able to make it through a season and have a successful season not taking any shots downfield. Which I think is true, but I think it's also fair to say that even without a lack of any type of vertical threat today, they were still able to run the ball very well against a good defense, right? So what happens if Nebraska can at least have the threat of that vertical passing game? Does that loosen up the box and the defense just a little bit more to create more running lanes? But either way, they've got to figure that out and figure out how they can at least get guys going down the field to at least have the threat of it. Because coaches in defenses in this league are just too good to be able to do something like that and expect that you're going to move the ball consistently.
So I don't want to criticize play calling. I thought Frost called a pretty good game.
Yeah.
I also thought that you could kind of sense the Lubick effect. The very first pass of Nebraska's season was to a tight end, and Jack Stoll was one of Adrian's primary reads on the play. At least it looked like. We're gonna have to watch it again, but they did some weird stuff. They lined up in the I formation with Dedrick Mills at fullback and Wando Robinson at dotting the I, and Luke McCaffrey played running back. We were all talking about him as a wide receiver, and then he goes and plays running back. They did some weird stuff, and they got creative with it, and they had success on the ground. They averaged 6 yards a carry. I don't have the sack-adjusted numbers in front of me, but it'd be better if you take out sacks. That's impressive. They ran the ball. They moved well. But at the same time, do you think Frost was too conservative? Do you think he was in a mode where he didn't want to put Adrian in a position where Adrian was going to make a mistake throwing the ball? Because this game last year against Ohio State, he had a career-high 3 interceptions.
The first question, yes, I do think that he was too conservative. I don't know if it was, that he was afraid of Adrian making a mistake, but I do think it was conservative because I think that as well as they were running the ball, it just doesn't kind of compute that you're running the ball that well, but you don't just take one play action deep shot on a 2nd and short, right? You would just feel like you could have one of those where, you do a play action to Dedrick Mills and you have Wandale Robinson running up the seam or something. There has to be a way to kind of figure that portion of it out. And to me, it would be a little odd if he was just afraid of throwing the ball deep. And we really can't even say if Adrian is not a good enough downfield thrower, to the Swedish question, because we haven't seen, I don't think, enough of it to really have a good handle on that.
Yeah, how often have we seen him attempt a pass downfield since 2018?
It feels like it's under 10.
Granted, we've only had one game in 2020, but still.
Right. Yeah, it feels like it has to be under 10, right? I don't know that for sure, but it feels like that.
Were you surprised? So they brought Xavier Betts, they brought Marcus Fleming, they brought Alante Brown, 3 true freshman wide receivers. They brought them, They don't have to deal with the redshirt rule. Eligibility is frozen, so they don't have to worry about using those guys for special teams. But they start Levi Falk, grad transfer, walk-on wide receiver. Omar's not there, like I said. Cade Warner is the other receiver, and they really don't get anything from any receiver that isn't named Wandale Robinson until Alante Brown has a catch in garbage time. Were you surprised at all that they did not use any of those 3 wide receivers? Because we heard about Alante Brown a lot in camp. And Xavier Betts was a guy that Lubick talked about as coming on. Were you surprised that we didn't get any of those guys earlier in the game?
I am, because Marcus Fleming was also a guy that has been talked about behind the scenes as someone who's been coming along quickly over these last 2 weeks, especially with Alante Brown, given he's been talked about like this for a long time now because he arrived in January, right? And so we've been hearing about Alante Brown as a potential starter for this year's team for quite some time. You see him get the 1 catch in garbage time. Even in that, I thought he looked good.
He made a nice
in the
move,
1 catch, made a nice move, was quick after making the catch. So I would be surprised moving forward if things don't look a little differently with those wide receivers. If you maybe you're starting to build their reps up and you get them more confidence. Like, I just think that something is going to have to change, but I definitely was surprised that you didn't get more of those guys involved.
Yeah, one thing that you've talked about is that you were curious if it was going to change with Matt Lubick here and now, if Nebraska was going to put young wide receivers on the field earlier. Mm-hmm. And I know it's only 1 game, granted it's only 1 game, but returns in 2020 would say no. So we'll see if those guys can get on the field next week when they play Wisconsin. The next topic, the big storyline or the big maybe surprise from this game was that the defense looked stronger front to back right. instead of back to front.
Right.
The secondary was terrible. How? Why? This was the strength of the defense.
So here's a theory that I have on this. When you come out and you play such off coverage and you're giving teams 12 to 15 yards of cushion for whatever reason, and we did not find out that reason yet, does it take a little bit of the aggression out of your secondary?
100%. DiCaprio Bootle looked like for stretches like he was not 100% juiced.
And then it improved as the game went along with a couple of those guys.
When he was involved in plays.
Yeah, obviously Deontay got involved a bunch. Kim Taylor-Britt got involved and then got tossed as well. And you saw DiCaprio Bootle get involved in some run support. Quentin Newsom, when he came in, was able to do that too. But I just feel like they didn't give themselves a chance. And I assume that you're playing that off coverage because you don't want to get beat deep. But they were getting beat deep.
They were still getting beat deep.
Yeah, so you might as well try and live with taking away those intermediate throws, because we kept saying, watching it, if Ohio State's receivers were to just run down the field, after 7 yards, stop and turn around, there would not be a Nebraska defender in the picture to stop them from a 7-yard gain.
And you could see Ohio State notice that and start going to it more throughout the game.
Right.
And I was curious if Nebraska was going to make an adjustment at halftime, and they didn't.
No, they didn't. So that was some sort of strategy. It didn't work. You end up with a quarterback that goes 20 for 21 for 276 and 2 scores in Justin Fields. He is very good. I think probably he's going to be a top 15 pick.
But you can't
make it that easy.
You can't play 15 yards off when you're bringing 4 guys to rush their offensive line and not getting any pressure.
Right.
One of them has to break.
Yeah, but I do think that they got I feel like they got a little more pressure than expected.
You think so?
When they brought blitzes, I thought that they got a little bit more pressure. They got 4 sacks in the game. I thought there were a handful that they should have had that they did not convert or finish off. So I was not disappointed in the pass rush in this game. But the secondary, and I don't know if this is the secondary played really badly, though they had some bad stretches, or the game plan for the secondary set them up to not play well.
Yeah, it might have been one of those situations where it was just a perfect storm because, ESPN Stats and Info said that Ohio State has beaten, I think, 13 straight Big Ten opponents by double digits, which is the longest streak in Big Ten history. It's a very good team, and the strength of the team is the offense, and the strength of the offense is the quarterback throwing the ball. They're very good. I think we were in agreement. Well, we were in agreement before the game that Justin Fields was going to hurt you through the air.
Yeah.
You just had to mitigate some of the big plays on the ground. Nebraska did well for stretches at controlling the line of scrimmage. it was just so funny that this is the way it played out, because in the offseason when we talked about it, a lot of the conversation with the defensive backs was centered around like, okay, you can have a great secondary, but how great can your secondary be if you don't have pass coverage, if you don't have pass rush, if you're not able to stop the run? Well, for long stretches, Nebraska was stopping the run. In the first half, I think Ohio State had like 3.8 yards per carry that they were averaging. And the secondary wasn't holding up its end of the bargain. And so, like, one thing that they did do, and this was before the ejections happened, was to come out to start the second half, Boodle moved back to safety, and Quentin Newsome came onto the field opposite Cam Taylor-Britt. You said, though the sample size was small, you saw some encouraging things from Quentin Newsome. Next week, Nebraska's going to be without Deontay Williams. They're going to be without Cam Taylor-Britt for the first half against Wisconsin. We'll talk about the targeting calls in a second. Do you think that Quentin Newsome showed that he was ready for a moment next week, or a chance next week?
Yes. Yeah, I think that he showed that, and he's someone too that the coaching staff has talked about. You've heard Travis Fisher talk about him a lot. Quentin Newsome is a guy that was right there and that he felt comfortable with, that he had been doing all the right things, and I thought that he showed pretty well today during that game, and I think he'll definitely get a chance next week to see if he can build on that.
Okay, so the calls. Somebody asked, did bad calls contribute to the final score? I don't think so, because at the end of the day, Nebraska had 8 penalties for 90 yards. Ohio State had 3 for 14. At the end of the day, Nebraska's self-inflicted problems in the second and third quarter did them in.
Right.
Frost said that at the end of the game. He said the end of the second, the early start to the third was the game. At the same time, at the end of the second, Ohio State got a pass interference call on Cam Taylor-Britt that was terrible.
Yes.
And it led directly to a touchdown that was the touchdown that made it, instead of 17-14, it was now 24-14 right before halftime. And then in the second half, then you get Cam Taylor-Britt thrown out. You could kind of tell that just based off of the letter of the law, that one was going to be targeting. Right. He used his head. It was weak. Sure, you could say it was weak, but by the letter of the law, it was targeting. The Deontay Williams one was garbage.
Yes.
And I think, do you think Frost wanted to say that in the post game and he just couldn't?
Yeah. Oh yeah. 100%. I think he wanted to say it, but he couldn't. But to answer the question, I don't think ultimately those calls are what lost Nebraska the game, but it's just another log on the fire of Nebraska not being able to get momentum. And this one, not necessarily their fault on some of those calls, because they were just some really bad calls. Like, it was a rough day for officials out there today. It was their first game too, but man, it was tough. And so it contributed, but it was not, I don't think, the key factor in why Nebraska lost.
Do you give them grace because of the offseason that the officials had to have? I know nobody in Nebraska is going to do that because, the conspiracy theories are going to run amok that Kevin Warren was out to get Nebraska and he's feeling pretty good right now. But this was to be expected, right? They didn't have their off-season clinics. They were going to be bad, but they also missed obvious calls that should have been called against Ohio State. Nebraska's
the same holding calls that
random thing with just not getting holding calls. Right.
There was after one of the targetings by Nebraska, there was basically the exact same play the next series for Ohio State, and it just no big deal. Like, it's weird. Like, I'm not saying it's some vast conspiracy, but the officiating was poor.
Would you appeal the 2 targeting ejections? Because Cam and Deontay are gonna have to miss the first half of the Wisconsin game. Would you appeal them? And do you think Nebraska would win those?
I think you do appeal them, absolutely, because there's no harm in not doing it. It'll come out that they did it, and there will, of course, be people saying, oh, here's Nebraska whining and complaining again. I don't care. They need to do it. If it works, then great. If not, you're in the same situation. But I would be surprised if one of them, if you don't get the Deontay one back. Even though it's more violent, but it was, I thought, a much cleaner play just based on the letter of the law.
Real quick, and then we'll wrap it up. Somebody asked, does the final score hurt confidence? Yes or no?
No. Actually, I think that because they're not. I don't think the team will be looking at that. I think they'll be looking at how they played and how they feel like they matched up physically with Ohio State. You heard physicality, any variation of that. I felt like if we did a word cloud was the biggest word. Competitive were the biggest words from today's post game press conference. I think Nebraska will take something away from that, feeling like they can match physicality with Wisconsin next week, which is something that has also been lacking over the last couple of years.
Yeah, I agree with you. I definitely agree with you. I think they showed that physically they are taking steps in the right direction. I think when they get into the film room and look at some of the stuff that they did, at least in the trenches, I think they'll feel better. It's not going to be they're not going to find solace in it because they obviously want to win, right. And I think that too is a positive sign that they're not going to be happy about it, right. Because they do want to win. They're a team that believes that they probably should have been closer on the scoreboard than they were. But yeah, I think I don't think this should hurt confidence at all. Ohio State's a really good team, so we'll see what they got next week against Wisconsin.
We will.
So, all right, thank you, Greg.
Thank you.
And keep reading HailVarsity.com because we're gonna have plenty of stuff coming up, both this evening, Saturday evening, and then into Sunday morning and throughout the rest of the weekend. Thanks, guys.